So it's the 10th anniversary of Skylanders Giants. So I figured it's that time of year, might as well just make another tier list. As you might already know, last year I did a tier list for Spyro's Adventure. So I figured for the 10th anniversary I'd do another one for Giants. Only I'm not doing just the Giants characters. I'm going to rank them with the Spyro's Adventure characters, including the ones that didn't get reposes, since I figured it's worth talking about them, because you can still obviously use them in Giants. Also, this video got me 20,000 views and got me past 300 subscribers, so yeah, of course I'd do another tier list. In all seriousness though, thank you for all the support, and also be sure to like and subscribe to see more content like this. But before we start with the Skylanders Giants ranking, I think it'd be worth it to do a bit of adjustment from the Spyro's Adventure one. So if you remember from last year, which I imagine that a lot of you did, because a lot of you watched that video, holy crap. But if you remember that video, this is exactly what the tier list looked like. And I was pretty happy with it, but I got a lot of comments suggesting some changes. It's also been a year, and I've gotten a lot more experience with a lot of these guys. So I figured that a ranking change was in order. So first of all, I think Drobot moves up 1. Whirlwind I think is still really good, but I think Drobot is just better. The primary attack is just so strong. And I think that Whirlwind does kind of fall off a lot since you don't really use air throughout most of the game, while you use tech for a lot more of the game, at least towards the middle. Drobot is present towards the harder sections of the game, while Whirlwind is in the easier sections, so her power is kind of wasted there. Next change is move Double Trouble to S. In fact, he's probably he's probably number 4. I have no idea what I was thinking putting him middle of A last year, but good God, he's insanely strong. Trigger Happy probably moves right behind Spyro. I've said it before, but having a projectile is pretty nice, so I think it just makes him better than these sorties here. Similarly, Camo probably moves up 1 compared to Igniter. Even though I think I like Igniter more, I think having a projectile... Actually, Camo has multiple projectiles, which really helps him out. A similar story with Gilgrunt, probably... These three are also probably on the same level. Honestly, the starter pack Skylanders are just good in general. I think Slam Bam is still fine where he is. The Ice Prisons are still really good. And the melee attacks are strong enough. And he's got a good movement option. Also, being able to swim is nice. Flameslinger, also similar story, probably moves up above Igniter. Prison Break can probably stay where he is. Although I'm probably going to... Actually, no. Probably these two switch. And I'm also going to move Zook up right below Flameslinger. They're pretty similar in terms of primary attack, but I think the secondary attack is really what separates these two. Is that having the movement and like the getaway option is better than just having the wall. And both their tertiary attacks are basically useless. I'm also probably going to move Terrafin down 1. Because I think being a melee Skylander isn't great. Even though being a melee Skylander in Spyro's Adventure isn't awful. Probably going to move Slam Bam down a little. I think probably right here, actually. I'm going to move Lightning Rod to top of C while putting Warnado in D. I think this makes more sense. I remember liking Warnado a lot when he came out, because I got him basically the day he came out. But thinking back on it, he really is not that great. I'm also going to move Eruptor up a tier. He's still really slow, but his secondary attack path is actually pretty good. I just don't think it's as good as Voodoo's Zip Wire Hook or the Tripwire. Probably move Stump Smash down 1. Still probably better than Voodoo, but I think Drill Sergeant is slightly better because he could break through those rocks that you have to mine. So that's pretty good utility on his part. I also think that since Lightning Rod can just swim, or you can just float above the water, that's also really nice to have in Spyro's Adventure. With Warnado, you need the tertiary attack in order to do that. And I think everything else should stay the same. I think this is a fine list right here. All right, so now we're on the Giants section. So this is mainly concerning hard and nightmare mode, just kind of together. If you do better on nightmare mode, I'll probably rank you higher, but being good in hard mode, it's not too much of a difference. They're basically the same, it's just nightmare mode is way more bullshit annoying, while hard mode is pretty fair and balanced. So what I'm immediately going to do Bash, no longer the best. I hate to say it, but that's the first change I'd have to make. Between Spyro's Adventure and Giants, he really falls off. His Wow Pow just isn't as good as like a lot of other ones are. And being a melee Skylander is awful, especially on Nightmare mode, because you just have to take hits. And the biggest problem is that his primary attack makes him hold still. So yeah, it does 80 damage per hit, which is really good, but he can't really do it too often. I think Double Trouble is probably the best Skylander in the game, at least in Giants. His Wow Pow just makes him do what he already wants to do, but better, because now you can like pick off the little enemies that are faster, or just start weakening other enemies while you're still holding the primary attack button. Remember how I moved Robot above Whirlwind for the Spyro's Adventure? Well, I'm immediately going to move him back down, because this Wow Pow just isn't really that great. The controllable Saw Blade is... it's pretty bad, honestly. The Saw Blades in general just aren't as good as the eye lasers. Stealth Elf can probably just stay where she is. There's nothing really too wrong with her. The Wow Pow is just kind of forgettable, honestly. You might accidentally end up doing the Beyblade spin, but it's still not that great. It's honestly harder to execute on purpose than it is on accident, which is kind of funny. I think one of the biggest glow-ups in this game was Hex. Went from probably one of my least favorite Skylanders to one of the most broken in the whole game. Her Wow Pow does insane damage. Remember how I was talking about how Bash was doing like 80 damage per hit, and if you charge it up it'd do like 300? Well, Hex just needs to charge up her orbs and then press A, and then she'll just have that skull that does 300 something damage per hit. That is ridiculously strong, especially if you go down the spellcaster path, which means you can summon the bone wall to camp out enemies and then just do your secondary attack. Seriously, this is probably the biggest change that any of these games will have. Sonic Boom basically just gets the Super Baby, and that's not great, honestly. It's okay, I guess, but especially on Nightmare mode, the baby just still dies in one hit to basically every enemy, and it doesn't really do as much damage as you'd want, so you'll either just end up spamming eggs or just using the Scream attack. I think I'm gonna move her down. I think I'll just keep her where she is for now, actually, and then move her as needed. Sunburn, obviously, didn't get a repose, and he doesn't have a Wow Pow. He's still good, but compared to literally everyone else on this, he probably has to move towards the bottom of A. Just having that extra upgrade is so nice for a lot of these guys. Stump Smash is another one I want to talk about. His Wow Pow is really good, especially when you go down the secondary attack path, because then he can just rapid fire 2 nuts at a time, and it just does insane amounts of damage. His lack of speed really doesn't matter, because you can just kill enemies before they even get to you. Although his utility of being able to swim is kind of lost, that doesn't really matter too much. Spyro and Cinder are still pretty similar. They both have similar movesets, and their Wow Pows are also really similar, both having to involve flight. Although I think Spyro's is slightly better because it has big AoE and it does a lot of damage, since Earthbound is already really powerful. But you honestly never use either of them. You're rarely ever flying, and when you are, you're probably just pressing your primary attack button anyway. I think their biggest problem is that it leaves you way too open. So if you end up using it, you might just end up taking hits, and that's just not good, especially on Nightmare mode. Zook is another big change. I'd definitely put him... right here. His Wow Pow with the secondary attack path, where the mortar shells create the cactuses, is insane. You just aim the mortar shell like behind walls, and enemies just aren't able to touch you. It is unbelievable how much damage it does too, because it's a lot of damage over time, especially on bigger enemies. They don't stand a chance. And hey, even if enemies get to you, you can still just put up the cactus wall and hide behind it. So yeah, Zook, really good. Slam Bam basically just gets... he just kind of gets more of what he needs. The tertiary attack now does damage, and I think it's a little faster. I'm not entirely sure about that. But honestly, the damage isn't, like, that great, but the extra speed is nice. I think I'm probably still going to move him pretty low here, because, like I said, being a melee Skylander, on Nightmare Mode is just hell. Unless your name is Chop Chop, of course. Because Chop Chop's Wow Pow is actually pretty good. You basically get way better movement, and then the shield is really strong. I was sleeping on the shield path. I had initially thought, when I played Spyro's Adventure, that the sword path was the only way to go. But the shield path is really good, surprisingly. It's especially good on Nightmare Mode, where enemies will be hitting you with Nightmare Mode numbers, and then you just reflect it right back at them. Still, the shield doesn't block all damage, and it doesn't last forever, so you might get caught off guard. But I won't deny that stunning enemies is still really good. I'll probably put him, honestly, above Sonic Boom. I really think the Wow Pow is that good. Igniter gets pretty similar. He gets like pretty similar results. I think his biggest problem is that you're gonna be either hit and running with the tertiary attack, but he's a little too slow to be doing that sometimes. So oftentimes you'll just do the one big hit and then run away. His secondary attack path is still really good though, and now it does like the damage over time stuff on the floor, kind of like what Flameslinger has, although probably not as good. Still probably put him above Camo. Flameslinger, the Super Dash just isn't great. It gives you more speed, which is nice, but it's surprisingly difficult to execute. And getting enemies to walk on it is a lot more difficult than you'd expect. You kind of have to go up against a lot of melee ranged enemies in order to make it work fully. But it's still helpful since you can just shoot arrows and then run away. Probably right there. Gilgrunt, triple anchor shot is basically useless. You're already not using anchor shot anyway, and just having 3 of them doesn't help that much. I think I like his secondary path is not as good as Gilgrunt's, but I still think that he's probably better. In fact, I might. Trigger Happy gets the super machine gun with the giant laser piss on it. It's alright. I think its biggest problem is that the laser doesn't go through walls somehow, even though it looks like it should. And the biggest problem is that you have to hold still to use it, but it's actually pretty decent against the final boss, since a lot of those enemies just won't do anything to you. So I think he's probably better than Spyro now. Still not great. He's a little too frail, especially on Nightmare Mode. He basically has to be level 15 if he wants to survive one hit. And even then, it's kind of 50-50 whether he does. Camo also probably moves to bottom of A. Being able to heal is still really nice. Although, on Nightmare Mode specifically, there's just so much damage that enemies are doing. You won't really be able to heal all of it. Zap's honestly been letting me down. Unlike Chop Chop, his secondary attack path is actually useless. And his Wow Pow isn't much better. It's basically, I don't even really know what it is. You press the tertiary attack and then you press your secondary attack button and then you do like a big AoE. But honestly, that's not what he was built for, and it's just not great. Especially since you have to ride the wave, which is easily the worst option out of your tertiary attack, because then you're going towards the enemies that do a bunch of damage to you. Honestly, just stick with Tesla Dragon. I'm definitely moving him down to B. Probably honestly worse than Stump Smash. Prison Break gets the like pulse attack when you're shooting your lasers through. It's pretty good. It does decent damage. I think the biggest problem is that you can only do 1 per laser attack, because the laser doesn't last forever. So basically you'll pulse, you'll be mashing B, you'll just do the crystals again, you'll press A, press B. That's basically like the loop for him. I still think he's probably better than Igniter too. Probably not better than Gilgrunt, because Gilgrunt has more range. But don't sleep on Prison Break, he's pretty good. Maybe I just need to use him a little more. Terrafin gets the body slam into and out of the ground, which is actually really good. I actually think being able to avoid a lot of damage is pretty nice. Although if you fuck up the input, you're basically dead. I'll probably keep him. No, I'll put him. I'll put him right here since he technically still is a melee Skylander, which is just not good. This is not double trouble. This is Ghost Roaster. Fucking hell. Boomer, same kind of deal. Gets to move to the bottom of the tier he was in. There's no wow pow, but he's still really good. The triple bombs is good. I still haven't... It's been a while since they've used his secondary attack path, so I don't remember how good it is, but I imagine it isn't nearly as good as the bombs. Dynarang, similar story. In fact, I'll probably move him to top of C. Whamshell definitely gets moved to C. I'll probably keep Ghost Roaster in B simply because I think they fixed his secondary attack, so where it hits an enemy more than once. But I didn't really get to use him while I was playing Giants, and I'm full up on Giants at this point. I'm kind of sick of it. But I imagine his tertiary attack might not be terrible for Nightmare Mode to get out of taking damage. I still think, yeah, he's probably still better than these guys. Alright, next up we have Lightning Rod. His primary, it's basically a big laser. If you hold the A button, he gets a big laser. The biggest problem is that his secondary attack path pretty much outclasses that entirely. So it's still good, and he lost the water walking utility, which really hurts him a lot. But I still think probably top of C, because using the lightning is less committal than the secondary attack, because it does less damage, and so you can like move around while using it. But it's kind of hard to use. Drill Sergeant, you're basically playing him the way you usually would. You'd go down the secondary attack path and then you just hold the tertiary attack button and then just run away with your secondary attack. He's like the ultimate hit and run guy because now the tertiary attack does a little more damage, but it still isn't great. And now that he's lost the drilling through cracked rocks utility, he's probably not as good. Voodoo probably moves down to D now since he doesn't have a wow pow. Warnado can stay where he is. Eruptor gets to he kind of has like the same problem that Lightning Rod has, where you just hold the tertiary attack button and you basically just get a big laser. Although you can move around a little more with his. He's still really slow, which is the trade-off. So if you're using it, it's okay. You still probably want to just mash the secondary attack with him though. He's probably better than these guys because I think the laser is kind of strong. I didn't really use him too much either, honestly. Maybe I kind of wish I used him a little bit more. And finally, Wrecking Ball. Wrecking Ball. He's actually not that bad. His wow pow is he's definitely the worst of the reposes, but having a wow pow is still better than not having one. The Disco Ball, I still don't even really know what it does. I think it just makes his secondary attack do more damage, which is kind of what he needed. He's basically a hit and run guy, kind of like Drill Sergeant, but with a way worse tertiary attack, so it's just not worth it. You just basically mash B with him, because then you'll do the explosion, and then that'll knock enemies back enough so that you can just roll away or roll towards them if you think you're going to kill them. But other than that, he's not terrible, honestly. I don't think I ever died with him, which is kind of funny. He's still not great, though, to be honest. Alright, so this is all the Spyro's Adventure characters re-ranked for Giants. I don't think there's anything I really need to change. Alright, let's move on to the Giants characters themselves. Let's start with the base characters. Flashwing is pretty good. Probably not as good as Zook. I still really like her a lot, though. She kind of has the same thing that Camo has, but her projectiles are way faster and longer range. But she can heal herself, I think, a little bit faster, since I think you can put more than one crystal on a wall, and it'll get you, like, double the healing. Maybe even triple if you can place it properly. So I think, yeah, basically just Camo, but better. Has a good movement option. Tertiary attack is kind of useless, but if you're running away from someone, it can actually do pretty well. The Soul Gem is kind of It's good for clearing out waves of small enemies, but once you get to the big guys, it's pretty much useless. You better off sticking with just mashing the primary attack button. Pop Fizz, I gotta be honest, Pop Fizz is super overrated. Kind of struggles with a lot of problems that Slam Bam has, is that his big damage dealing attacks is melee stuff, but you don't really want to be using that since the potion throwing is way safer and arguably just as good. When you go down the beast form path, you should basically never leave beast form unless there's like a cutscene. But the biggest problem is that getting into beast form is really committal. It takes like, I want to say 3 or 4 seconds in order to activate it. And a lot of the chances that you have to activate it, you usually in like a small enclosed space. So activating it is a huge risk as you're basically just a punching bag for a couple seconds. And remember, enemies on Nightmare mode do a shit ton of damage. I honestly think that the primary attack path is better simply because 1, it's a lob, which is nice to have sometimes, and 2, it's just a lot safer than the beast form path, even if the beast form path does do more damage. Hot Dog, he's the only ranged character that has like combos, which I thought was really weird. I don't really know where to put him. He's kind of like Eruptor, honestly. They're really similar. He's a little faster, but in exchange, he has a worse AoE control. And his range is alright. You can press... the secondary attack is... it's alright, I guess. His range... it's just a little too slow, in my opinion. And then the tertiary attack... it's alright, I guess. It does decent damage. If you're going to do up close and personal with Hot Dog, which you probably should since his fireballs don't go that far, the tertiary attack with the Soul Gem, it'll serve you well. I still don't think he's as good as Eruptor, honestly. Fright Rider. Well, is it any surprise? He's just not good, honestly. Maybe I need to go down the other path for him. I only went down the primary attack path where you get extra damage with the lance, but I honestly don't know if going down the secondary attack path will change anything. He doesn't have a projectile, which really sucks. So being a melee Skylander really, really sucks, obviously. But he doesn't really have a way of getting out of danger. The secondary attack it's good for movement. It's good for getting towards enemies, but it isn't good for getting away from them, unfortunately. And the tertiary attack, it leaves you open too often, so it's just not that good. Especially since he lacks a Wow Pow, it really hurts him a lot. No wonder he was never reposed. I don't think anyone really liked him. Jetpack is good. He's pretty solid. I think his biggest flaw is that his secondary attack is easily his best attack, but it's at its best when you're up close and personal, which I obviously said isn't really great. But he does have good movement. His primary attack isn't awful, but the primary attack path isn't just... it's nowhere near as good as the secondary attack path. I still think the best part about Jetpack is that he can like suck up food and coins from like a far distance, so if there's like one out of range, you can just have him pick it up. And that's just like a neat little thing that not a lot of Skylanders get. It's basically like swimming from the first game, except only he has it, so he's basically got a monopoly on it. Chill is pretty good, but only if you go down the primary attack path. The ice wall path it's alright. The ice walls do a decent amount of damage, but the primary attack is way more spammable, especially when you have 3 of them that do a lot of damage. It's just probably more worth it to go down. Probably not better than Jetpack still. She's a little slow, doesn't have a movement option, and she's got like Chop Chop's shield at home, where it'll push the ice blocks, and then you can hold it to like block damage, but since it doesn't get reflected back at the enemies, it's basically just... it might save you. Maybe. Shroom Boom. Shroom Boom's biggest problem is that his attacks just don't work. Like, at least his secondary attack path. His primary attack path basically just has him do what he does best. You just get that... once you get the charge shot, you're basically just spamming that because it does a decent amount of damage and has a lot of knockback. So you basically just spam that along with the paratroopers. I think his biggest problem is that he still doesn't have great AoE control, and he's really slow, so he doesn't have any good movement. I didn't really use the self-slingshot too much, but I imagine it does like a decent amount of damage. But I think the biggest problem is obviously you're sending yourself into the fray of enemies, so that's probably not that's not really what he wants to do. And the last of the cores is Sprocket, and everyone makes fun of her for being bad, and it's because they're right. I still think she's probably better than these guys, because I think that there's one strategy that you can use for Sprocket, and that's just going down the primary attack path and just getting the triple bouncing Betty mines, because then you could just throw the mines and then run away, as she's kind of got like a decently fast running speed. But the sentries are just useless. They take way too long to set up, like longer than Pop Fizz's transformation, and the tanks are just way too slow. You'll basically just get into the tank, shoot a couple dudes, and then they immediately die because you're on nightmare mode. Alright, so we're on to the Giants now. So I'd like to say that the Giants are probably better than the cores in most ways, as the game is built around the Giants, so there's a lot more stuff that you can access with the Giants, like breakable walls you don't need to grab bombs for, so puzzle solving becomes a lot more streamlined. The boulders, they're alright sources of damage, but their main purpose is destroying enemy spawners, which is pretty nice because you don't really want to be dealing with a lot of enemies as Giants, because Giants' biggest problem is that they're just big punching bags, essentially. They got like double the health of all the cores, but they still die just as fast, unfortunately. And no one exemplifies that more than Crusher. Easily the worst of the Giants, and it's not even close. His biggest strength is obviously that he's a Giant, so he can do a lot. He can do things that most of the cores can't. But he's so slow. He's the slowest of the Giants. He doesn't have a projectile. His secondary attack, which turns enemies to stone, doesn't do damage from the start, and it doesn't even work on every enemy, I'm pretty sure. It doesn't work on a lot of the Archeans, which is mainly what you're going to be facing towards the end of the game. And like his tertiary attack, if you invest into it, it's okay, but it still leaves you way too open, as it essentially spreads your hitbox all over the ground instead of right in front of the enemy. And controlling it isn't as easy as you'd think it is. Basically, what you probably want to use with him is just holding down the primary attack button to use the like saws that travel along the ground. But other than that, I don't think he's really that good. Especially, he does a lot of damage, don't get me wrong, but when you're basically just a big punching bag, you kind of can't really do that much. Going from probably the worst Giant to arguably one of the best, T-Rex is really good, but it's not for the reasons that you'd think. His primary attack is actually really good, and then when you get the upgrade where you can hold it, the big shockwave, it does a lot of damage, it has a lot of knockback, and it has a way bigger hitbox than what it really leads on. The secondary attack is also really good movement, even if it isn't incredible, but where it's really at is this tertiary attack. The little laser blob basically is his whole gameplay strat. You just run away with the secondary attack and then you shoot the enemies. And then his tertiary attack path, I think, is definitely his best one, since you get the super laser beam, which does 100 damage per hit, which is really good, by the way. And it's really fast, too. It's kind of like, it's basically slower version of Bash's a tail whip, but it does more damage in its range, which is really helpful. Obviously, since he's a Giant, he also gets that utility, but again, he's still a big punching bag. And I don't think his secondary attack path is awful either. The elbow drop is really good, and it's similar to the primary attack where you hold it. It has like a lot of knockback, and it's got good range. But honestly, I really do think that the tertiary attack path is definitely where it's at. Hothead is up next. He's pretty good. I think being able to turn into a motorcycle is really funny for like a soul gem. But I think his main thing is that he has a lot of everything except range, which is probably what you'd want for most Giants. His primary and secondary attacks, obviously mixing, is really nice, although the biggest problem with his primary attack is that you have to get a little too close for my liking. His tertiary attack is also okay. I went down the tertiary attack path in my most recent playthrough. It's alright. The oil wave is just It's like good damage. It's a good source of damage and has good range on it. So he has really good AoE control. But the biggest problem is that he's a little too slow, and a lot of the bigger enemies don't really care too much about the fire rain. And also the spirit bomb that he has is basically useless. It's a good source of damage. It's kind of like what Tree Rex has, where you hold down the tertiary attack button, but it's harder to land, especially against flying enemies, and it takes way too long to charge up, in my opinion. At least you can move around while charging it. But the biggest problem is that charging it doesn't change the damage at all. It always just does a flat 150, so you might as well just hold the button down until you actually have it and then throw it. I still think his primary and secondary attack paths is probably better, simply because the oil blob moves around, so it automatically attacks enemies, and setting it on fire just makes enemies just kind of melt away. Swarm, definitely the best of the giants, and it's not even close. I was pleasantly surprised by Swarm. The only real issue that he has is that his primary attack and his most reliable source of damage is being up close and personal, but that's really not that bad because his primary attack is really good, and then he gets, if you hold down the button, you get the ranged version of it, and then when you press B, you can fly, and then you get the stinger shots while you're flying, and then the wings do damage too, which is really nice. I think my favorite part about Swarm is that he's the fastest of the giants, so that means I don't really want to kill myself when playing a giant. His weakest attack is obviously his tertiary attack, although I didn't go down his tertiary attack path and I haven't used it yet, so maybe I'll need to get a little bit of experience with that. His soul gem is kind of funny, but you rarely use it. You're mainly just going to want to shoot the stingers when you're flying. Honestly, I wasn't expecting Swarm to be my favorite giant, but here we are. Ningini is also really good. Her biggest problem is, again, that her main source of damage is melee attacks, but the bottle more than makes up for it. The bottle, honestly, starting off, is probably one of the worst attacks in the whole game, as it takes way too long to charge up. You're basically just a helpless bottle until you emerge from it again. That all changes, of course, once you get the bottle rockets. The bottle rockets basically change Ningini into a pretty solid melee range Skylander with good damage to a really good ranged Skylander with great damage. Her tertiary attack is also just a solid projectile. It's always good to have one of those. And her soul gem is probably one of the best. It's basically just a big stun mist that just surrounds you. So what you'll end up doing is you'll press the tertiary attack button while in the bottle. All the enemies will be stunned. And then you can just go ham with the bottle rockets and then emerge from the bottle and do a bunch of damage before the enemy can even react. Her biggest problem is that she's still pretty slow. I think she's on the faster side for giants, but she's still a giant, so she's still really slow. Hey, speaking of slow, we got Thumpback. Yeah, probably bottom of B. His biggest problem is that he's trying to be a really good ranged Skylander because the anchor goes really far, but I think the biggest problem is that it's kind of hard to aim the thing. The spread is nice, but it's not as good as you'd really want it to be. He really needs to throw the anchor out way farther, or the spread of the anchor needs to go out farther. Other than that, his secondary attack it's a movement option, but it's probably one of the worst since it's really high committal and it doesn't go up slopes for some reason. So I think the biggest issue that he faces is that once an enemy gets in range, you can't really get away. The bite is also just pretty much useless. You'd rather just use the anchor, even if the bite is pretty strong. Another weird thing is his primary attack path, because you just get combos, more damage on the anchor, and then an upgrade for one of the combos, which just isn't good, honestly. You're rarely ever using the combo because it takes so long to charge up. You're basically a sitting duck during it. Bouncer is pretty good. He's like trigger happy. He's like a lot of tech Skylanders, actually. I've noticed a lot of tech Skylanders have like the rapid fire primary attack, although his is a little worse, since yeah, you can hold the button, but when you do that, you're slower, so you basically just want to mash it like you do with Trigger Happy. I honestly think his best attack is probably the rockets, though, since they lock on, so when you're running away like a little pussy, you can basically just press the secondary attack button, you'll just get some free damage off. The eye lasers are okay. I don't really use him too often. I'm basically either using the primary attack or the secondary attack with him. Although, once again, being a giant is really good. And I'm pretty sure he's got the fastest walk speed for a giant, which is also really nice because it still feels like you're playing a giant, but it doesn't feel as bad as a lot of the other ones, especially like Thumpback or Hothead. In fact, I'm probably going to move him probably right here, yeah. I think, yeah, he's probably better than these two. Probably better than you two. Alright, and last, and probably not least, but still not great, we got Eyebrawl. I kind of like Eyebrawl, but I kind of don't at the same time. His secondary attack is really nice since it's basically a projectile, but it leaves your body wide open, and enemies will go for your body and not the eye. And the eye just needs to do, I think it needs to do a little more damage. I don't think it does enough damage to warrant going down the path. What I think is kind of funny about Eyebrawl is that he's, you know, one of the slower giants, but his primary attack lunges him forward a little. So what you'll end up doing with him is just mashing the primary attack button in order to move a little faster. His soul gem also isn't great. It's okay, but you rarely ever use it. You kind of just forget that he has it sometimes. So this is the final list. I think this is a pretty good idea of what I believe both objectively and subjectively in terms of Skylanders Giants. So tell me what you think. Am I totally wrong about someone, or am I totally right about someone? It's the latter. I'm totally right about everyone. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and have a great rest of your day.